it was a big musical challenge, which I rose to, and I got it done, and I delivered it, and then I didn't know what to expect.
Welcome back to Side Quests. Today, we're talking about Bully, one of the most beloved games in the Rockstar catalog, and one of the biggest creative triumphs of the sixth generation of gaming consoles. It won GameSpot's Best Original Music in 2006. It was a finalist for its Game of the Year award, and it was the subject of a Scholarship Edition remaster in 2008. And if it wasn't beloved for its sandbox-style juvenile delinquency, then it certainly was for its just as out-of-the-box soundtrack, composed by Shawn Lee. Shawn's work includes his material with Young Gun Silver Fox, his side project Shawn Lee's Ping Pong Orchestra, material with Amy Winehouse, Khalees, Jeff Buckley, Lana Del Rey, film and TV compositions on Nip Tuck, Ugly Betty, Ocean's 13, you get the gist, he's done a lot. And yeah, he also did Bully, his first and only video game soundtrack he manned all the way through. But before Shawn soundtracked Bulworth Academy, he had to have a few influences, and that's where we come in. Today we'll be chatting directly with Shawn Lee about the music that shaped him growing up, and all the ways that music, whether directly or indirectly, inspired him on the road to Bully. I hope you enjoy the music of Bully and the influences of Shawn Lee. When you look back now, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of Bully and the Bully soundtrack?
Well, the first thing that just came to mind now was somebody sent me an email from Rockstar, and I didn't really know that much about it, if I'm being honest. And I was with somebody who was younger than me, who was a gamer, And I saw some guy from a company called Rockstar sent me an email about doing music for a game. And I said, have you heard of that? Yeah, I didn't really know that much about it, if I'm being honest. I know the earlier kind of Sega Genesis stuff. It was a little bit, I just didn't really know much about it. So it was like a real step into the unknown. So I knew that Rockstar was like a serious thing, and of course the idea of doing that appealed to for. So it seemed like a good opportunity, and then they flew me out to New York to have a meeting with me, and that was it.
This was the first game that you were able to kind of compose and soundtrack front to back, but does this remain the only game that you've ever done that with?
It is, yeah. I mean, I thought I would have did more after that, but yeah, nobody ever asked me. I mean, some of my music has been used in other games, and even some of my Bully music's been in other games. Yeah, I mean, I did a couple little bits for a couple of things, but that was it. I mean, like I did a bunch of music for a thing called Zombie Playground. I did a bunch of music for that, and I ended up releasing the music myself from that a bit, so it's out there, which was fun to do.
I do want to get into the coolness of that being the game, because that's such an iconic soundtrack. But
I mean, I'm really proud of it now, and I think it's stood the test of time. And I guess if you're going to do one, that's a good one.
You grew up in Kansas. I watched an interview you did where you spoke about, the kind of influences that you had growing up in Kansas, growing up on, classic rock and soul, the Beatles, the Stones, Hendrix, Zeppelin. But as a kid, do you remember your first encounter with a song or an album that you fell in love with? Like the first one where you just knew, hey, I love music.
I don't know if I could come up with the first thing that I heard that hooked me or blew my mind, but I remember when you're like 5 or 6 or whatever, and I could just remember hearing stuff on the radio and just really, thinking it was great. I guess it would have been like the Beatles and Hendrix and you know Burt Bacharach kind of songs and Motown.
Hmm.
Would have been hearing all that kind of stuff. So like you know you know little Stevie Wonder and Diana Ross and the Supremes and Marvin Gaye and that sort of thing and like I said, the Beatles and the Stones. That would have been the stuff that I was hearing in the late '60s. And remembering it. But I mean, I always loved music and I think the radio was like a porthole
Hmm.
into another world, of imagination and I don't know. I think I always used to imagine playing along to records when I listened to them and air drumming or air guitar or I just was always like really drawn to music. It was like another world.
And what's the first, I guess, album you bought with your own money?
The first album that I bought with my own money was the soundtrack to Shaft by
Okay.
Isaac Hayes.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, which is it's a
It's a
pretty,
good one to start with.
it's a good one to start with. And I remember the first 45 I bought with my own money, and that was Stevie Wonder's Superstition.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
then the first album that I ever got that my dad bought me was Chairman of the Board in Session, which was like a soul record that was on a label called Invictus, which was a sub label of Stax. So I guess I kind of really started off, you know, with the soul stuff, straight away with the records. By the time I was, getting my own records, I was buying a lot of soul 45s and albums. And I started off with a soundtrack record, which is interesting as well.
I read that, when you moved to LA, you were already a multi-instrumentalist, but what was the first instrument that I guess picked up or were drawn to?
The first one was guitar.
Hmm.
And then I think I played guitar for I don't know how long it was, a year,
How old
two
were you?
years. We got a drum set.
Okay.
Me and my brother got guitars at the same time, and I instantly sort of, you know, got better at it than he did. And he was my older brother. He didn't
Hmm.
like that, but then we got a drum kit, and we started playing at the same time. And he took to the drums more than the guitar.
Hmm.
So, and I liked the drums. I wanted to play the drums. My brother was like, he was pretty good, and I was pretty good on the guitar. So he was like, I had to play the guitar, and he had to play the drums. Wouldn't let me play the drums. As soon as he graduated high school, our drum set was at home because it was at school during the school year.
So there was a
And
vacancy.
yeah, and then all of a sudden, that summer I went bonkers. So I was like a teenager, and I started playing. There was this little sort of thing where my brother didn't like that I was playing and that I was getting good. And my brother was always very competitive with me, older brother thing, and so that kind of came to a head at one point. But then my brother, he moved out, and I had the drums at home, and then I almost straight away started playing professionally on drums. I started playing professionally when I was 16,
Uh-huh.
um, and I got pretty good at it, and so the guitar sort of slinked back for a while until I started to write. When I started to write music, of course, I went back to the guitar, to write on,
Hmm.
and I think then the guitar very much just became a something to write on. It just chords, riffs, guitar parts. It was just very much a functional, thing. And same thing with drums. When I started writing, recording music, all of a sudden the drums became, very functional as well. And I was thinking about how do you put things together? What do you do?
Hmm.
How do you support the song? Like, what's the part? What are the other bits? And I started to kind of, it was like, the whole idea of playing instruments just became a tool to create a song or a track. And that was really the beginning of it for me when I started to do that, because I realized that was the purpose of me doing music, was to make songs, to make tracks. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to, and I wanted to make records.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, this is the context. This is what it's all about. Space.
And as a something I was curious about is like as a kid, teen in, the 70s, early 80s even, I think probably you were like a late teenager then or maybe early 20s. But
Yeah.
what was your introduction to video gaming? I know you mentioned kind of like being familiar with stuff in the 90s, but did you have any like arcades that you would frequent, or did you have any interest in that stuff like Atari, ColecoVision?
Yeah, I think my very first thing I ever played was the original thing, which was Pong.
Hmm.
On somebody's TV. It was impossible to play. It was like, and you go out and you'd miss it. You'd miss it every time, and maybe you'd get lucky and hit it, but then the next person wouldn't get it. It was pointless. It was absolutely ridiculous.
Was it
There
one
was
of the ones where
not.
you like put something on the screen and then now it's
Yeah,
hockey?
you put it on the TV. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's almost like playing ping pong.
Hmm.
Just black and white. I did in the early '80s. Um, especially when I was in my first year of college, I started going down to the video arcade like a lot, you know, in the student union, and I was playing Jungle King. I really got into Jungle King, and I got obsessed with getting to the next level, all that kind of stuff. But before that, I guess in the arcade, I really loved Space Invaders,
Hmm.
and I loved Galaxian and Pac-Man, and particularly Miss Pac-Man. I think was a better game for me than
Yeah.
than Pac-Man. So those are the games that I really liked right there. Defender, I don't know, man. Defender was a little bit. I just couldn't get very good at it. When the Street Fighter thing came out, and that was like some next level tech when that came out.
Hmm.
That was like it was like the next jump up. And by then I was sort of like, yeah, maybe a little bit too old for this now. And plus too, I was in college, and it was like there was this thing where I was like, I'm spending all these quarters, which turn into dollars
Hmm.
while I'm in college, and it's kind of like, and I'm spending my time and my money, and getting a blister on my finger.
Did you think about, I guess, like the music of it at all at any point when playing these games? Like, did any of it stick with you?
I mean, I think some of those 8-bit games, the music was quite catchy, wasn't it? They were. I mean, it was very naive, wasn't it? It was very naive, and kind of in a cartoony way. But I don't think it wasn't like particularly, as I wasn't really that familiar with video game music other than like the kind of 8-bit stuff. Um, I just assumed that really that all the video game music prior to me doing Bully was all pretty much electronic. So I kind of felt like, well, I'm approaching this in how I approach all the music I make. There wasn't a different way that in the process of making music. It was as I was already doing. So you know what I mean? This was before I think after I did that, you started to get these orchestral, kind of scores. I mean, I knew a guy that did I think it was LA Confidential,
Yeah.
which yeah, and he's the same guy that the composer that I did stuff for on the Getaway,
Hmm.
and which we had orchestra on that as well. Um, but that was orchestral, and a friend of mine actually did the orchestrations for for both those. But yeah, and so I realized this was like this was sort of a game changer. I came in and did that, and things seemed to change a bit after that and get a little bit more into like a new kind of approach to the music, and obviously the games, with Grand Theft Auto and all that kind of stuff. It was like, and with the technology as well, and the animation and the voiceovers, and them getting famous people, to do voices and actors, and licensing, music and all that. Video games became very big business.
I know like initially you didn't know too much about the game, but when you were pitched, I guess, the concept of Bully, um, what did you think about it?
I mean, I didn't really see any kind of bit of the game at all. But I knew it was called Bully, and there was fighting going on, and it took place in a school. And then they gave me loads of, like, mood board, music, stuff that they liked, that was all like things that, to let me know the kind of shit they were into and the kind of influences, that I'd be drawing from. So I mean, that was like, it was very eclectic. It was everything from, like, sort of French 70s film music to, Danny Elfman, or the Donnie Darko soundtrack, Italian soundtrack music. Then there was like more electronic stuff, like, the Prodigy, and Chemical Brothers, and Yellow Magic Orchestra. I mean, just, it was a lot of different stuff, and at that point I had to sort of then extrapolate all these different, like, musical genres and ideas. I had to figure out, like, sort of musical palette,
Hmm.
instrumental palette. What was I going to use? What was my? I had to put together a musical team, basically, and so I decided on certain kinds of instruments. Some of them were like, things that had a school connotation. So, like, say, like a melodica, had that, kind of thing that was made me think of school. And I got this kid's piano. I went to New York, had this meeting, went back to London, and then I went over to Japan, and I was in Tokyo. And I was basically thinking about the soundtrack and thinking about how I was going to do it, because I was going to start doing it when I got back from Japan, basically, because I had to get right into it. And I saw this kid's piano in a department store in Tokyo, and it was a Kawaii kids piano, which they only have in Japan. You
Hmm.
can't get it outside there, and it's a little bit less funky sounding than your normal kids piano. So it's a little bit more, it's less metallic, and it's more melodious sounding. And I got that. I thought, this is going to be one of my main, instruments that I'm going to use on here. This is like, definitely in the starting lineup of instruments. And so I brought that back, and then I had a few other ideas, and a lot of it had to do with, just taking whatever inspiration there was from things, and then whatever they gave me when I first started. It was like, I think they wanted me to create about 15 pieces. So they kind of hired me and paid me to do that. And then once I delivered that, then it was like, if they liked what they got, then they would, you know, contract me to do more, and which is what happened. I did get the theme in that first, you know, thing. I got the doom boom 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 boom. Yeah, I got that in the first group of cues. I mean, I did kind of nail, all the real main stuff in that first go, trying to find what my thing was. And I mean, I think the idea really was that they had given me so many different kinds of musical styles to deal with. I then had to really take all those various eclectic musical ideas and distill them in to one kind of thing. Like it needed to sound like one person composed this score rather than you know one thing sounds like this and one thing sounds like a needle drop.
Hmm.
Like very different things. So I had to like find a way to tie the more electronic stuff to the more atmospheric stuff, and you know what I mean, all
Hmm.
that. And that was like it. And I had to like decipher a language of that. And so I kind of figured that out, with a bit of you know conceptualizing, and
Hmm.
then just doing it, and just taking the leap, and doing what felt right. And from there, they hired me to do some more cues. I don't know how many it was. It was a bunch more. It was like, I don't know, maybe it was like another 20 or something like that. And I did those, and then they hired me to do more, and they just kept doing that until the whole score was done. Which took a better part of a year. I think it was about 8 months of pretty full time working on that. I mean, I was making other records
Yeah.
while I was doing that, but that was almost more like I was doing that to keep my sanity. I was
Yeah.
like, I need to like spend an hour or two doing something else, and then come back to the score.
I'm curious, like, what did you find worked the best for you, like locationally? Like, was this primarily done in like a home studio for you, or was there like a separate office or somewhere you'd go to?
Yeah, okay, I'll tell you how it was done. At the time when I first started it,
Hmm.
there was an engineer named Pierre Duplon who I'd worked with in the mid '90s, and we kind of worked together. He did some engineering on one of my albums, and
Hmm.
then he started engineering for a producer named Tim Simonon, who
Hmm.
did something called Bomb the Bass, and he produced a really big Depeche Mode record. I forget what it was called. Uh, Something like Revolver, but it was a Revolver, whatever it was called. So anyway, he did that, and then we started hanging out and having like coffees and stuff. And then so when I got this gig, I was like, "Hey man, I got this gig. Would you like engineer for me?"
Hmm.
So I went to his apartment, in Archway Road in North London, and I live in North London as well. And so I went there. I brought a bunch of stuff there. So I brought you know a guitar,
Hmm.
one bass, a bag full of stuff like my melodica and some percussion instruments, and I brought a glockenspiel. I brought my kid's piano, some effects pedals, and my auto harp.
Hmm.
Um, and so I had all that kind of primary stuff in there. And so, we were doing it in his apartment, and then right after we kind of started working on the music, I took over a friend of mine's studio space. He moved back to LA, and he said, "You want to take over the rent and take over the studio?" And I was like, "Yeah." Drums down there. I had my amps. I had like a piano, I had an organ, I had some synths down there, and some other stuff. And so how I started to do it was I would kind of go maybe like once or twice a week to my studio in the West End. I'd record live drums, you know, whatever, piano, organ, harpsichord, the kind of stuff that I had in there. And we'd burn it onto DVD, R or CDR or whatever, as either as audio or as AIFF files. I would take it back to Pierre's apartment, and then we'd load it up, and I might play drums on a track that I'd started before, if you know what I mean. And so that we would finish everything at Pierre's, and mix it there, and send all the files to Rockstar, as we were doing it. And we didn't have internet, at Pierre's, so we'd have to go down the road to the internet cafe, and I'd have to like check my emails to see what Rockstar was saying to me or whatever, and get their briefs and they'd be like, oh yeah, that track's cool, or we don't like that one, but we think it works good for this, and then we need something blah 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 for that, and then I would go back, to Pierre's and carry on, and it was a funny little process, but it was like I mean, we started off, I think, at the beginning working 4-day weeks, and we kind of worked like sort of probably 10 hours a day. This went on for a while, and then I kept doing music, and then it was like there was just so much music. I mean, you'd finish 4 or 5 tracks, and there'd be like another 20. You'd be like, oh, you just couldn't like. It was like imagine your boat filling up with water, and you were bailing water out and bailing water out, but it just like kept coming in. It was like, you were keeping the boat from sinking, but you were still like, in this kind of vicious cycle. And so I started working 5-day weeks at
Mhm.
some point. And then 5-day weeks weren't enough to keep up with the amount of music. So then it became 6 days a week. And I had a small, my oldest daughter was a newborn back then. And I wasn't sleeping so well either,
Mhm.
you know. And so I was like, operating on very little sleep, and it was quite brutal. It was a relentless thing. You just couldn't finish it. It was just you kept getting closer, but it was still far away. It was like it was mental. It was just so much music.
And
It was pretty overwhelming, really. But I just one step at a time. One track at a time, one overdub at a time, and eventually it gets done.
what for you was the most challenging piece to write for Bully? Like, if you can think back to that.
I think, I mean, yeah, there's one that springs to mind because conceptually it was so weird.
Uh-huh.
Was they wanted some ambient wrestling music, and then you kind of ask yourself like, what the fuck is ambient wrestling
Is that
music?
how they pitched it, or?
Yeah, that's how they pitched it to me. Yeah, we want ambient wrestling music, and so you obviously you think of ambient music, it's some sort of drone atmospheric thing, you're right? But how does that relate to wrestling? You know, like it doesn't seem like it just seems like a little bit of an abstract concept initially. There was no like reference track for that. It was just a some sort of weird, idea. And so that took me a minute to like, I'm like, I don't know what the fuck that is. So I kept doing other things and not doing that. There was another thing too. They wanted like a dub metal thing, and that was another funny kind of juxtaposition. And I could sort of imagine what that was in a way, but I wanted to make sure that I would say, okay, I know what the dub is. You know what I mean? I know what the dub is. You know what I mean? I got that bit covered, but I was when it comes to the metal, I was like, what kind of metal are we talking about? So I was very, is it this kind of metal? You know, it's like when we do the crossword puzzle and you get one word and then you go, oh, then you're able to get another word. And the things I wasn't so sure about, I get a couple in the bag, and then I'd go, hopefully in that time, you know, it's stewed around in my brain enough that I kind of had an idea of what to do. And every now and again, you would do something, they wouldn't like it for the thing that you did it for, but they'd repurpose it for another thing. But like doing it, something that wasn't quite right led you closer to what it was, because they didn't always know what they wanted. I didn't do another game after that, but after I did Bully, I really didn't want to do another game for a while. I was like, you know what? I'm not doing another one of these for 5 years. Maybe I'd be ready to do another one from now, or it had to at least be a couple of years to recover from it, because
Mhm.
it was, in all honesty, that was a real tough job because it was just so much music, and it took so much time, and it's so much harder than doing a film soundtrack or a record. I mean, it's the hardest, single most hardest gig I ever had because the sheer amount of music there was. You're talking about like 100 pieces of music plus 50 stings. And it was a lot to do and a lot to conceptualize and a lot to play and a lot to write.
As we look at like the social statuses of these kids, like the nerds, the preppies, the jocks, whatever, like I guess which status would you say you would have placed yourself under as a kid? And do you feel like that gave you any advantage in composing a certain portion of the soundtrack?
That's an interesting question. I was always a musician, but I was into sports too. And so, I guess I was a little bit in with the jocks, but I wasn't totally in because I was a musician. So, which sort of in a way allowed me to connect groups totally. I always felt like, I was, you know, slightly on my own kind of path, so I didn't never really fit in totally in any kind of social pocket, you know. But being a musician did that. But on the other side of the coin is that also music has a way of cutting across, boundaries and stuff, and so people can think you're cool, you know, across the board. So I think for me, like the music that I initially in the game that I had to think about a little bit more was like the nerds. Like, what do the nerds like? Because you think, well, the nerds probably don't have, great taste. Or no, actually, it wasn't the nerds, man. It was the preppies' lame taste. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
I had to like think about what kind of stuff like those kind of people would have been into. And I guess it was the really middle of the road kind of stuff. It made me think of stuff like Huey Lewis. You know what I mean? I thought, yeah, they'd be into like Huey Lewis. So there's like this one tune. I don't know if it's. I don't remember titles and what the tracks were very well, but I think it was. Oh, and it wasn't Cheating Time, but there was one where it was like it was a preppy one, and I was just it made me think of The Power of Love by Huey Lewis in the News. And my thing goes is like so it made me like think of that. But I was thinking of that was sort of like the initial influence. And my thing didn't sound really the music didn't sound anything like Huey Lewis, but the kind of beat, and the cadence of the beat made me think of that. But I think for the jocks and and the stoners and all the other things seem to be a little bit more literal, like what that would be, what kind of music. I guess I was really drawing on, what it was like being in school, in the 80s.
Is there any like moment in, where you could look back and say like, hey, this part of the soundtrack reminds me of like a Hendrix or a Zeppelin or like this thing that I grew up on?
That's a pretty good question, man. It's a pretty good question. It doesn't have easy answers off the top of my head for that. I think I was just really drawing on, you know, because it happens in school, or drawing on that whole idea of what it was like to when I was in school,
Yeah.
and how it worked socially, and also about I think it was about really tapping into that the kind of that kind of naive childlike simplicity that you have, so like some of the like the thematic and ideas and stuff, they were real like they were very they were very kind of like coming from a real kind of childish younger perspective, like of doing stuff that was simple and nursery rhymey and not trying to be too sophisticated or like the doom 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 doom. It's kind of tapping into, I guess, I felt like there was this thing that was there was this naive, uh, yet kind of like darkness. I felt like there was a dark kind of atmosphere to the game a bit. There was this kind of like little bit of a quirky, twisted, dark childhood thing. And I kind of felt like Danny Elfman, the scores that he does really tap into that kind of dark childhood, spooky, but
Hmm.
cheeky, kind of weird childhood thing, where stuff is kind of like it has a darkness but a naivety as well. Those kind of Morricone spaghetti western soundtracks were definitely something from my childhood. That would have been at the very beginning of me listening to music. It was in there as well. So that was a real formative musical influence. That kind of atmosphere, that kind of down 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 down. It's like they were very kind of quirky and iconic, those kind of things, and they're very cool. They're very stylistic, and I mean Morricone is like one of the greatest, in my opinion, one of the greatest composers of all time.
If you can think, fast forward a bit to when this game came out, would you have imagined that, it would have touched as many people as it has when you were?
Absolutely, absolutely not. You know, but as the years went on, I started to realize that the music meant something to people, and that was a really nice thing, and it did surprise me. And then I would started to see people covering bully songs on social media, and I thought, oh, wow, like musicians like really like this stuff. This is really cool, and gamers really like it, and started to have this kind of cult following.
I know we already talked about this, but like if the opportunity presented itself, could you see, another video game soundtrack in your future?
Of course, I mean, I would love to do another one. I think it's been so long since I've done one. I mean, I was a little bit like perplexed why nobody asked me to do another one. I started to think, oh, maybe people would just like, I did think about it for a while. I was a bit like I would have expected, because I know people that have done video game soundtracks, man, and then they've done it. Yeah, nobody's really asked after, except for the zombie playground people. Nobody's asked me to compose a thing. I mean, I thought Rockstar would hire me again, but I wouldn't want to do Bully, part two. Like, if there was ever a Bully two, I mean, I'd like to do it, but that's not what I meant. But I think like I would want somebody to go, we like the Bully score. Could you do something like that for our game? I wouldn't
Hmm.
want to do that. I want to do something
Brand
that
new.
I hadn't done before. A chance to kind of, you know, I'm letting the dog out. Uh, you know, chance to kind of flex and do something different. But yeah, I mean, I would love to do another one. It's been a long time. I know it's entailed in doing it now, and but I mean, the next one would be different. Obviously, it wouldn't be the same thing, but yeah, I would love to do another one. So if anybody's listening, please hire me. But yeah, I would definitely, I would definitely make sure things were slightly different. Yeah, so I don't earn anything from it. I just got paid to do the score, and that was it. Yeah, and there was no budget to do it, so it was kind of like, whatever I paid out of my own pocket, production cost of making the music ended up coming out of the money I got paid. So, um, you know, I mean, I would really, really love. I had thought about it before, but I had a conversation the other day about the idea of actually doing, a few kind of live gigs of playing the Bully score.
Wow.
I would love to do that. So if anybody's interested, I don't know, maybe I have to like make that happen, make like one show happen. You know what I mean? And then once people see that I've done it, and some other people want to book it. But it would be a bit of work to get together. Maybe that's what's keeping me from doing it. I'd have to like do it, but I know people would love to see it. It would be a thing, man.
The legacy of the soundtrack, and I can only imagine that people would be excited about something like that.
It would be a great thing to do, man. I mean,
Gotta reach
even
the right
even if I only did a couple of gigs, if I did, just in a few places that wanted to do it, it would be a great thing.